Hi there, hope you're having a pleasant day wherever you may be. I have a feeling a lot of people learned a new word this weekend. I'm at the Sesquicentennial celebration of the Golden Spike. So for those that have been playing along at home, you probably remember that I was here just a couple years ago on my solar eclipse trip. So if you'd like, you can take a look at that. But what do you say we get back to this one? But what you need to know is that this is Promontory Summit, and this is where the Transcontinental Railroad was completed. One group started from the east, the other group started from the west, and this is where they met. May 10th, 1869 was the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, which linked the East Coast with the West Coast and spurred the westward expansion of the United States. So it goes without saying that the Transcontinental Railroad is a major milestone in the history of this country. It connected the East with the West, not only with physical rail line that you could move people and goods, but also communication because of the telegraph wires that were also installed along the right-of-way. So it was a huge achievement, akin to landing on the moon by modern standards. Now, this is obviously a very unique celebration. You know, these round numbers only come around once in a while. So this is not a typical visit to Golden Spike. Obviously, there's a lot more people here. They expected 10,000 people. I don't know if it was over the course of the weekend or just the main event, but there are a lot of people here, way more than my previous visit on a random August Saturday. Unfortunately, with that comes some downsides, like mainly the visitor center was closed, which is probably a good call on their part because it would just be inundated. It's a really small visitor center, so everybody would have just been packed in their like sardines. But the celebration goes on all weekend. They have bands playing. You could probably hear one right now. They have reenactments going all throughout the weekend, food, things like that. They really went all out. And pretty impressive too, because they managed to get all these people in here through one road, one little two-lane road. The main ceremony, there was speeches for dignitaries and things like that. And there was also an emphasis on the sort of marginalized, forgotten people, the ones that did the work on the railroad, namely the Chinese and the Irish, with also nods to like the Native Americans that were affected as well as the Mormons. So they went all out to make it a point to acknowledge their role, because this could not have been built without their labor. And for that ceremony, I mean, it was pretty spread out. My spot was sort of in the back corner, so I could see kind of one of the locomotives. I couldn't actually see the ceremony. There was like a tent in my way, but they set up big screens on both sides so that people could see what was going on, see the people that were speaking. All in all, it was a really cool thing. It was about 2 hours long or so. For the main one. There's going to be reenactments later on, but that was the main one. The last time I was here, they did have the busted rail, which meant they did the ceremony, but it was sans locomotives, so we had to use our imagination that day. Luckily, they got it fixed in time for this celebration, actually a while back, but so I didn't have to use my imagination this time. So needless to say, I was very excited to see the locomotives in their spots, not just in their little barn. Another cool thing is that because of the telegraph, this was considered the first mass media event. From coast to coast, people celebrated the news that they found out pretty much immediately that the final spike was driven. The famous DONE telegraph, done, signaled the celebrations all across the country. Now, one of my favorite stories of the event, of the first Golden Spike ceremony, was that the flag on the flagpole does not have enough stars for the amount of states that were in the Union in 1869. Despite all the pomp and circumstance that was going to be planned for the event, nobody thought to bring a flag. So they asked around, and luckily there was some retired soldier that had one, but it was outdated. It didn't have enough stars on it, so that's the one that was raised. One of my favorite stories. Another story that I like is that neither one of these engines was planned to be here for this event. The Jupiter replaced another locomotive that got into an accident coming from the west, and then a bridge washout prevented the Union Pacific's originally planned locomotive from coming from the east. So they had to scrounge to the last second to get these two here. Now, for those that may be wondering why there still aren't trains running through here, well, that's because it's very difficult to get up here. Required a lot of helper engines and things like that back in the day. And then in the early 1900s, they built a bypass that went across the Great Salt Lake and pretty much rendered this thing obsolete. By the 1940s, they pretty much just stopped running trains, and they eventually lifted up the rails to help with the war effort. All in all, coming to the Sesquicentennial celebration was a great experience. I'm glad I got to witness this little piece of relived history, I guess you could say. However, I must say that if you get the opportunity to come on a regular day, especially a Saturday during the summer when they do the reenactment, I highly recommend it. You get to see and experience things at a much more personal level. As a matter of fact, when I came that Saturday in August, because I was wearing pants, they offered to let me have a speaking part at the ceremony, but I declined because I'd never been here before and I wanted to watch the ceremony. So yeah, little things like that definitely were not going to happen with 10,000 people here. Well, that does it for this one. Thanks for joining me on this trip to northern Utah for the Sesquicentennial of the Golden Spike celebration here at newly appointed Golden Spike National Historic Park. Yes, that's right. It's no longer just a site. It got upgraded to a park earlier this year, so very exciting stuff. And I hope you had a good time, maybe learned a little bit, and I guess I'll see you on the next one. Now, at the original ceremony, there were actually 4 spikes. There were 2 gold ones from California, a silver one from Nevada, and then for whatever reason, Arizona had a spike. And there wasn't one from Utah, which doesn't make sense. But at the Sesquicentennial here, they unveiled a copper one that represents Utah, which makes sense. You know, this is where they met. This is where it ended. So why did it take so long?